So this presentation is all about Office 365. So I think we have about 45 minutes. What I'm going to try to do is end a little bit early, and then if you guys have any questions, hopefully we'll have some time to field those. A little bit about me before we get started. I was born in Sacramento, California. I was raised in Germany. Now, my travels, I've ended up in Martinsburg, West Virginia. But been around with a lot of different industries. I've been a manager for the Ford Motor Company, manager for General Motors, Dulles Airport here in DC, and one of the largest truckload companies in the United States, which is Schneider National. Also worked for the United States Coast Guard, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Berkeley County, Eastern West Virginia Regional Airport, and a lot of nonprofits and private industries. So we work with managed services providers a lot, but also, our clients include pharma, construction, a lot of different companies that do a pretty broad spectrum of things. So kind of familiar, we've gotten familiar over the years with all of them quite a bit. So these are a few pictures of my family. I have a wife. These are my two kids, my daughter and my son, and my pets, and that's a little bit about me. So this presentation is about Office 365, and we're going to be touching on some pretty powerful stuff, and I'm going to try to cover all the bases, but we'll try to stay at a high level because there's a lot of ground to cover. One of the key things I want to point out to start is that as I'm sure everyone here knows, Office 365 is cloud-based, but really what that brings is a pretty powerful tool set that you get with an online environment, and we're going to touch on those things. Our agenda today, we're going to talk about document management. Most of the presentation is kind of heavy with this part. We're going to be talking about tools. So again, most of the presentation is weighted toward these two things, but we will touch on automation, workflows, dashboards, integrations, and then we're going to talk about some best practices, architecture, governance, security, and then also some costs. And what are the upfront costs, where are the hidden costs, and we'll talk about that as well. So let's talk about this document management. So first of all, the question we always like to ask is, what problem are we trying to solve? So McKinsey did a study a couple years back, and what they found is that they did a study to find out where people are spending most of their time in a given work week in business. And what they found is that almost 20% of people spend, people spend almost 20% of their time searching for information. And this could be documents, but it could also be just information from the guy next door in the other office adjacent to me and who's on vacation right now, and or people in a different building. And so really one day out of the week, people are looking for information, just a lot of time. Part of the studies also found that when companies use social media internally, then it became, if you could do that, if you could master that, then that can reduce that kind of searchable record of knowledge, or really increase it by as much as 35%. Personally, I think even more. So that a lot of documents in organizations or a lot of knowledge and information in organizations is not just in documents, right? It's in people's heads. Probably all of us have felt that, somebody leaves the company and, it leaves a big gaping hole. So how can that hole be closed? Is there a way? And the quick answer is, spoiler alert, the answer is yes, you can close that quite significantly. And we're going to talk about that. But what can we learn from this study? Well, a couple things. We need to make documents easier to find. We need to allow collaboration virtually. We need to make that easier and allow co-authoring. So co-authoring is where two people are in the same document at the same time. It's more important than ever. And I think all of us would probably agree with that. And then realizing that content and knowledge is not just in documents. So how do we get it out of people's heads and get it into some kind of searchable content? And then use internal social media. Using internal social media sounds crazy, right? It's like, wow, now I need to manage social media. But actually what we find is that if it's done right, it's natural. People are already on Facebook all the time and TikTok and, using those social media tools. And it's actually a natural kind of segue into how to do that. We'll talk about that. Let's talk about this first thing. So how do we make documents easier to find? So when you have your documents in Office 365, it eliminates a bunch of problems. First of all, you don't need a VPN. You're logging in through Microsoft's secure portal. And as you know, Microsoft's got an army of security people whose only job it is to make sure these things are safe. And if you have your documents inside of Office 365 and you go to the search capability in SharePoint, for example, it will search not just the titles of your documents, but also the contents. Even if you have PDFs, provided, assuming they are, text readable PDFs, which most of them are, the crawlers will read that content and when you're doing search results, as long as you can remember some kind of key phrases inside of the document, you can just do a single search and it will deliver those results. So it's very powerful. It gets away from needing to, build in your own tags into documents and in your titles and, metadata tagging. It really kind of gets away. We don't encourage that now. What we really focus on is don't worry about it. We set it up in a platform that allows you just to search the contents, and that works really well. The other part is virtual collaboration and co-authoring. So probably all of us have had the experience. Have you ever had a document and you need someone to provide feedback on it? So you might send it out to a few different people in your organization, and you say, hey, I'm going to email this to you. It's an attachment. Hey, can you read this over and let me know what you think? And so they read it over, and then they put their comments either in line or somehow in the body of the email, and they send it back. And then if you've ever experienced that, and you get like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 emails back, and then you got to, your job it's a monumental task to kind of consolidate all those comments back into the master copy. That's not the only problem. The other problem is now everybody's got a version of this copy, a version of this document that's not authoritative. So this is often what happens. You get a proliferation of documents and no one knows where the golden copy is. Well, the modern way to do this is to use a platform like Office 365 is where you keep that golden copy and that's where it stays. So if you need feedback, you're emailing people links to the golden copy. I'll show you what that looks like in a bit. People then get an email that links back to the document, and then they can be in the document at the same time and actually work on the document and provide their comments either in the online version or in their local version of Outlook or whatever application you're using, Excel or PowerPoint. And they're able to work on that single document together. That link then will work next week. And now, as updates happen, people are still seeing the golden copy. So it's a powerful tool to simplify and make sure that, vital company assets are accessible and you know where the authoritative version is. So co-authoring, if you've ever done this, you kind of know how it works, but more than one person can make changes at the same time. If there's conflicting changes, you're going to actually see people in the document at the time you are. And if you're offline, and I'll touch on this more here in a moment, if you're offline and make changes, the sync line is smart enough to know if anybody else has changed the particular content that you've been editing. So if no one else has edited that particular comment, it's going to sync those changes, no problem. If you're working on a Word document, it's going to see, okay, well, no worries here. Sync those changes back up. If there is a conflict, it's going to flag the person that was offline. There's a notification you're going to get, and you're going to say, hey, there are some changes we couldn't sync. we need to reconcile them. And then you click it, it brings up a window, and you can go, it opens the document, changes, and then you got to pick who's you're going to accept. So it's really all built in. One of the questions that comes up with this is, okay, well, great. So, we have 10 people in there working on a document. How does saving work? Well, saves are happening constantly. So as edits are being made, those saves are happening. And it's really behind the scenes. There's no save button in an online version of a document. It's just happening behind the scenes. But then oftentimes what happens is people, for example, will say, well, okay, well, I want to go back to last week's version. Well, that's what versioning is for. I think everybody's kind of been in that situation too, right? Have you ever had a situation where you had a document and you wanted to, I need to save this version, right? So you create your own version. You do your own versioning. You say copy 1 or you say copy 2. Well, all that goes away with the built-in versioning. So you don't need to worry about it anymore. All the versions are saved. You can go in here and you can view a previous version. You can either open it and pull out the part you want and then save that to the master version, or you can go to one of these versions and you can restore the entire document and it'll create it as a new major version. So there's a lot of capability built in there. So how does the sharing work? So there's really all levels of security that you can build in. So let's say, for example, you want to allow sharing externally with, let's say, somebody that's not part of your organization, and you want to share this document, maybe collaborate on it. No problem. So you can click anyone with the link. You put their email address in. You get to pick whether or not they can edit, and you can even pick whether or not to put a password on it. So if you don't put a password on it, anybody with the link can open that document. But you can set it so that you can password it, and then you send a password in an email, and you can create your own password if you want and do it that way. Or what you could do is just share it internally with folks. And if they don't have access to that document already, they're going to get access to it when you share it. You can determine what level of access they have. Or you can say, okay, well, what if I just want to share it with somebody that has existing access? You can do that. You can do it with specific people. Those are more internal things. But really, the sharing capability is pretty versatile and allows you to share things as needed. I'll get through this section. I'll pause for a minute. This is the section that talks about the sharing, and we touched on this with someone mentioned about SolidWorks. So you've got this 3D rendering software, or I'm sorry, files, and going over a VPN is problematic because you have latency, and it's difficult to work on the document because it's just laggy and just doesn't perform very well. So the way this works is that on your file explorer, what we do is we take a SharePoint library and then we sync it to your local file explorer. And the tool that's used for that is OneDrive for Business. That's not to be confused with OneDrive, which is something else. OneDrive for Business is specifically meant to synchronize your SharePoint with your file explorer. A lot of people don't want to go to SharePoint to manage their files anyway. So what we do is we allow them it's just a button. You click a button in your SharePoint library. It syncs it very easily. You authenticate one time. You don't have to authenticate anymore. So it's tied into your Windows login then. So you log into Windows and this connection is established. So there's 3 different icons that appear, and you notice here in the status, hope you can see them. You got these icons here. So you got a cloud icon, or you'll have a green circle with a white background, or you'll have a solid green check mark here. So if it's up in the cloud and not local, you're going to see this cloud icon. If you've opened it one time, the first time you open it, you're going to see a little window will pop up and it'll download a synced copy. And after that, though, the synchronization happens by itself. And then you can edit the document. You can be offline. If you're using an application like SolidWorks, then it's really making those changes to your local synced copy. And then when you close that file, it will go and synchronize that file back up to the cloud. There are a few things to watch out though. When you're using applications like SolidWorks, really the watch out is sharing conflicts that can happen. If you're using Microsoft Office tools, the sync client does a real good job about syncing those and making sure there's no conflicts. So usually what happens is if you're working on it locally, you might want to use a feature like checkout, check-in, so that other people don't try to edit the document. So there's ways that you can use to manage that. The other watch out is some documents use relative links. So if you use it locally, the application, Adobe is like one of these applications that does this. It will look at works great for me, right, on my local file explorer, but really what it's done is it's linked to files with my file path, my hard drive path with my name. So somebody else goes to open those files and the path is different, right? Because my name is John, the other guy's name is Joe. So it's looking for John's local file path. Well, Joe doesn't have that. So those are the watch outs, but part of that is just making sure that we've fit the solution to the right thing. But Office products works very well for that. The other advantage with using modern SharePoint is that they're all mobile enabled, and we're in a much more mobile world now than ever, and having SharePoint sites that are automatically responsive, and you're able to you're on the road and somebody needs you to look at a document, they send you a link in your email, you pop it, you click that link on your Outlook, which is on your phone, takes you right to your SharePoint site with a well-formatted document that's suited for mobile. So it's really integrated with all those different applications. So before I go on, I'll pause for just a second. Are there any questions? You guys can hear me okay, right?
Yeah, I actually have a question. Have you come across any limits as far as synchronization? Because I know in the early days there were some file sync limits that people would have too many files or too much data in a doc library or a OneDrive shared folder, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to sync everything locally.
That's a great question. Yep. And there's the way that sync client used to work is it attempted to take all of the files in SharePoint and synchronize all of them locally. And that didn't work because what they did is they tried to constrain the document libraries to 5,000 files. And the sync client really just couldn't handle it. So with the modern sync client, what that does is, because it's not actually syncing anything really, all it's doing is it's showing you what's in SharePoint, and then you can selectively pick what you want to sync, which gets around that. Watch outs though are that for that capability to work, endpoints have to have Windows 10, and they have to have the Fall Creators Update. And I believe that came out in 2018. If you have the Fall Creators Update and you have Windows 10, then this sync capability will work very, very seamlessly. Good question.
Thank you.
So yeah, the challenge is always, okay, well, what about this social media stuff, and gee whiz, can we, is this something that we can do? I mean, it seems like a change. It seems like a pretty big change, but actually, it doesn't have to be. People, I believe, are already, we're already in the social media world, and we're already in a social media mindset. And these are some examples on the screen of actual sites we've set up for clients that have utilized the social media aspect themselves. So the key of this is, the old SharePoint, I'm going to call it classic SharePoint versus modern SharePoint. And, the differences are vast. Modern SharePoint, the way this works is that classic SharePoint, you often needed a developer, frankly. You needed a guy like us to come in, and even if first of all, we needed scripting and JavaScript, and it was a lot to build it out, and then if you wanted to change something, it wasn't very easy. You needed a developer again. All that's gone away. With classic SharePoint stays, but it's like, think about it as a platform. On front of that, you have modern SharePoint, which is like a skin. And that skin is really designed and intended for end users to modify and change layouts and add content and really utilize the social media aspect that it's built on. And it works very well. So the way it works is that we kind of create layouts, but they're very easy to edit. Users go in, they click an edit button. It's WYSIWYG, right? What you see is what you get. You can link to stuff. You can link to stuff online, offline, layouts, strategic planning. And here are these examples that are on the screen are examples of that, where our clients that we've built this for, this is all their content. They've created this. And so they've had a lot of success with just kind of adopting this idea that, I don't want to put my thoughts into a document that's going to go on, a virtual shelf and never be read again. It's quite a different matter, though, when you create a post and you share it with everybody, and then that post goes onto a SharePoint site. People get it in their email with a link back to the site, and they get a very well rendered version of the post. It's also very easy to create a beautiful post. You can now select images from an image bank. You can go online. And all this, you can create a post in 2 minutes, and it looks like, a professional did it. And in fact, really, you are the professional. So it's a powerful capability. So tools. So, there's Teams, OneDrive, and OneDrive for Business, and SharePoint. Let's talk about these a little bit. What are all these different things? How do they work together? This slide is really meant to show, kind of what role each one of these tools is meant to fill. And this is where a lot of people, it's confusing, right? I mean, you got Teams, you got SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, Stream. What do all these things do? Well, I'll start with SharePoint. SharePoint is really meant to be your content collaboration location. So yes, it's documents, but it's much more than just a glorified file share. It allows you to co-author, version, we've talked about that. It allows you to create pages, wikis, knowledge bases, dashboards that can integrate with external APIs and any data source you can imagine, whether it's SQL or cloud storage or scraping websites. It can do all of that. So it becomes much more than just a file share. It really is meant to really connect people you work with across your organization. So next I want to go to Teams up here. So Teams is really meant to fill the thing that really was missing for a while, which is that instant messaging side of it. Now, as meeting virtually is a hugely important thing. We're on a Teams session right now. It really works good and it works well. And so, but also what it now allows you to do is, instant message. You can IM somebody and communicate, but the connection here is that on a properly designed team site and SharePoint site, they're actually connected. So in your team, you'll see your SharePoint library, and the permissions in Teams and SharePoint sync up. So if you're IMing somebody and then you say, okay, well, hey, let's look at this document, right? That conceivably often happens in an instant messaging thing session. And then so you can go to your SharePoint site right there, and there's where those documents are. So it's a powerful integration. So next, go to Stream. So Stream let's leave Stream for last. Let's go to OneDrive. So OneDrive, as opposed to OneDrive for Business, they serve two different functions. I'm going to talk about them kind of both at the same time, actually. OneDrive for Business is meant to connect your SharePoint to your Windows, to your File Explorer. And the idea here is, people know file shares, and it's familiar, and you got folders, and just everybody knows how they work. So what it does is it gives you a file share experience with all the power that you have on the SharePoint side. We've touched on that already a little bit. So that's the purpose of OneDrive for Business. OneDrive now is different. What OneDrive is for is those are basically my documents. I'm not sharing them. I'm not collaborating necessarily with them. These are the documents I control. Now, yes, I can decide to share them with somebody individually, right? But unless I share them, really no one can get to them. And what we try to do, help folks feel, understand, okay, well, what's the right place for OneDrive? What's the right place for SharePoint? So there's a few things that, are important with that. But really, essentially what it means is, if you've got a file you're working on and, it's not ready for SharePoint, you're probably never going to share it. Maybe OneDrive is the right place. What we often encourage, though, is, most documents you're working on, if they're company assets, they should probably be on SharePoint. But there are exceptions. So OneDrive fills that niche quite well. And let's talk about Stream. So Stream is something that a lot of people don't know about, but if you've got videos and you use a lot of those for various reasons, whether it be internal training, or if you have videos for any reason, Stream is the perfect place for that. You put your videos on Stream, and depending on your plan, it will actually take your video and create a transcript out of it that becomes searchable. So when you're in your SharePoint search, and it's actually going to look at search your video content too. And so if you do a Stream search and you find hey, we talked about this in a video, it's going to show up in your search results. So it's a powerful tool there. All these tools are linked in some way. They have a common connection, some aspect of it. Usually that aspect is SharePoint in some way, which is why SharePoint can be such a powerful tool. Idea is that, though, it's really meant to get organizations doing with the kind of stuff I talked about before. Work together, collaborate, use the right tool, but also be flexible enough, right? That's always the challenge. The art of what we do is, yes, you want boundaries, you want tools that work, but the tools shouldn't get in the way. If someone wants to go and manage their file like on their File Explorer and do things from there, you want to allow that, right? You don't want to stop them or make things harder for them, because if you do that, they won't adopt it, they won't use it, and it'll just be a big frustration. I think one of the other reasons is, the whole Office 365 suite can be really intimidating because there's so much in it. But really, the art again of what we do really has to be, you don't need everything. Let's just figure out what problem are we trying to solve. Let's just solve that one. Maybe that's all you need. Touching on automation. So how am I doing on time? 7:27. So workflow automation. So this is another powerful tool that we've used with a lot of our clients. And we have a client, they do a lot of traveling, and they have these travel requests that they had a hard copy travel request, and they had various stages they need to go through, and it was always like, okay, who has it now? Where does the approval? It's like everything used to get hung up, and there was really confusing about where things were, and then things got missed, and it's pretty painful. So what we did is we created a workflow that automated that, and Richard, who you'll be hearing from here in a bit, worked really, knows these very well, and so it's just an example, but workflows really can help automate that tedious stuff. And if you've got things that are very repetitive and follow the same process all the time, the workflow might be the right solution. The other thing is dashboards. These are some that we've created, but and they how do you in an organization communicate what matters? And these dashboards can help that a lot. And whether the source data lives in a database or if it's on a server somewhere or wherever it may be, it doesn't matter. We use tools like Power BI, and we connect into those data points, and then when those data sources refresh, the dashboards are refreshed. And so all this data is always constant, current. Best practices. So governance, security, and architecture. So let's talk about that. So we touched on this a little bit in the beginning of our meeting. So Bob mentioned, I believe, data loss prevention. So really what that is it really helps to identify and protect your organization's sensitive info. For example, let's say, for example, you had data loss prevention turned on, and you can actually set up data loss prevention to look for specific things. So let's say you're concerned about HIPAA compliance. What you would go in data loss prevention is in that module, you would go and say, okay, anything that's HIPAA related, I want to, if someone's putting that into an Outlook email, I want them to be notified in Outlook before they send it with a warning that says, hey, you can't send this. That's a social security number, or whatever that might be. Can't send that, and so we're going to prevent it, and we won't let them send it. Or you can set it up so that it says, okay, we're going to let you send this, but this is against our policy. And by the way, you're going to have to, report this to an administrator that you're doing this, right? Or you can say, well, okay, just warning, this is a HIPAA compliance issue. We're going to let you send the email, but it's against our policy. So it just can be informative. So there's all kinds of levels of security you can build in. It works with, bank transfer information, social security numbers, credit card numbers. It can find stuff like that and prevent those from being lost and going out in email or other ways. And it looks inside documents too, by the way. So if you're attaching a document, it scans inside the document too. Records management. So automating your retention schedules throughout the content lifecycle. So, you can do that. So, if you're a law firm and you have a case and that client folder needs to be purged right on schedule, that's what records management does. It often won't do it automatically. It will flag it, notify somebody. A human usually has to intervene to say, yes, we do want to delete this, but it does do that. Information governance. So that's part of that, right? Information governance is, classifying your content. So, if, for example, it's basically like reading the type of content you have and making decisions based on the content itself. Threat management is protection from online threats. So, for example, your firewall, phishing scams, of course, we're all, very concerned about, phishing attacks. So threat management is what, the tool that, intercepts those phishing attacks and also allows you to create simulations to simulate for various threats. It's pretty simple. It's not like it's very sophisticated. We use more sophisticated tools ourselves to train people, and we have a whole program, but it does do that. Even though, however, with the best threat management tools, the best firewalls, hackers are not stupid. They work really hard to circumvent those. About 7 to 9%. I read a statistic recently of those phishing attacks go through because the hackers set up new domains and new approaches, and they're always trying to beat the system. So you got to be aware of that. It's not perfect, but it does catch the vast majority of them. Data privacy again puts requirements around how personal data is collected, stored, processed, and deleted. The e-discovery. So if you have a situation where we had a client recently that they let go one of their employees, and the courts asked them to put an e-discovery case on all of their documents, and so they had to actually put this e-discovery on all of their entire SharePoint site and prove that they had done that so that no documents could be deleted or purged or hidden or anything like that. So we put that in place for them, and then at a certain point, once the courts are happy, then we release that and turn that off. And then supervision really helps you define policies. I know there's a lot of text on here, but there's policies, and you can have all kinds of ways to capture email and third-party communications. And if you got traffic coming through that you could flag it as suspicious. Like if somebody's trying to I don't know, embezzle or crazy stuff like trying to do things which can be flagged as illegal or something like that, right? If you suspect that, then you can create policies and you can have things reviewed. So Like I said, Microsoft has an army of security people. There's a ton of capability in here, and it is all built for that in mind. The other part that's kind of interesting here is the Microsoft compliance score. So let's say, DFARS, NIST 800-171. Let's say, for example, um, you know, currently, we're still self-certifying, right? So, but that's going away now. If you're trying to go for your CMMC certification, you're going to have to partner with a organization that's going to certify you. However, in Office 365, you can set it up so that it will, like, there's actually a NIST compliance module, and it goes through. It has all the questions. This is an example of a compliance score for a specific area, but there's all kinds of different compliance areas you can plug in, and then use it as the authoritative tool to go through and move forward to your compliance for your NIST 800-171. So if you work with the government in any capacity, that's going to be a very important thing for you to do. So more security and compliance things. The idea is that these are really intended to be kind of visible in a dashboard format. So if you go to the Security and Compliance Center, you're going to see a kind of a screen like this, and it's going to show you kind of what's happening with your automation, and what things are going on, what policies are flagging, what threats have been stopped, and what is kind of going on behind the scenes. So there's a ton more here, but this is kind of a basic overview of one of the screens that you get. So I'll pause for just a second. Are there any questions? I'll allow some questions for the end too. I think we'll be wrapping up here before our time is up, so we should have some more time.
We do have one question here, John.
Sure.
In the records management area, how do you purge from backups?
So what we do is we have separate backups. What we like to do is set up a different backup process. And typically what we like to do, because people like to control their own backup information, we usually set up their own Azure storage, and then the backups happen on the Azure storage. So we use this third-party tool to determine when those backups get purged. So depending on what you're comfortable with, that's a separate process, and because we want that backup to happen independently of everything else to protect all the assets. Does that answer that question?
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about architecture. And if you Google failed SharePoint projects today, you're gonna see a lot of results. And people talk about that sometimes. We talk to people who they've sworn off SharePoint. They're never worked, and there are a lot of things about it that people really don't like, frankly. And a lot of that has to do with really a lot of these sites are kind of homegrown, right? People kind of go in and they just start doing things. And in SharePoint, the benefit and the drawback are the same, and there's 7 ways to do anything in SharePoint. And data architecture and site architecture are critical to getting a SharePoint site put together that really works and it fits, and is not over-engineered but not under-engineered, that provides the right level of guidance and boundaries, but yet allows enough freedom. So a lot of what we do really is about finding that sweet spot. The way we do it now in the modern way is we put it together in such a way that makes architecture. When you think architecture in a house, right? Well, changing your architecture after you've poured the foundation and put the walls up, and then you got a roof on it, changing your architecture, right? It's a big deal. Well, modern SharePoint is designed differently. So what we do is we build it in such a way that your architecture is a lot easier to change. So if your needs change and you really realize, what we thought we wanted a year ago, now we see we need something different. It's one of the big changes with modern SharePoint, and so we're able to make those changes. So costs, the upfront cost, the cost of entry into SharePoint, pretty low. We'll talk about hidden costs in a minute. But the cost of entry into SharePoint is pretty low. So these prices are user per month. And depending on your organization, the costs are anywhere from basic, which gives you a certain set of things, gets you online Office Suite and Outlook, to more advanced stuff, which gets you in the SharePoint and Security and Compliance Center, and when you're getting up here into these E-type licenses, you're getting a pretty robust mix of capabilities. But a lot of people don't need all this, right? A lot of, you get a lot for the $12.50 and, a user per month. But if you have a lot of users, right, that is something to consider. But not everybody needs the same license. So, we'll spend time figuring out, okay, what do people need? And, you can usually, and I'm sure Bob does this. He probably does this all the time too. And, you figure out what is the right licensing and figure it out that way. So the cost of entry on the surface is very low, but the development costs, and Richard will talk more about this in his presentation, is, those are the hidden costs. And what does it take really to build out a SharePoint site? Oftentimes we work with folks and they realize, wow, it's amazing how quickly we can do things when needed. So, okay, so really that's it.